Legends tell and bards sing of the legendary hero known as Dragonborn, who vanquished the mighty dragon Alduin, the World Eater, whose actions single-handedly ended the civil war and prevented the return of both Queen Potema and Mirak, the first Dragonborn, thus saving Skyrim and the whole of Tamriel from certain doom. The Dragonborn, through their actions, shaped the future of Skyrim in unimaginable ways, setting in motion an irreversible set of events that allow Mike to tell you this story today. Much about the Dragonborn has been lost to history. Sources vary about their whole identity. Some say the Dragonborn was a Bosmer woman who killed the Emperor and only a week later enlisted in the Imperial army to fight against the Stormcloak rebellion. Others say he was a Nord, a true Nord who led the companions on a path away from her sin. There are even some who claims that she was an Argonian who, despite facing fierce racism by the Jarl of Windhelm, decided to join the rebellion, for she was a devout follower of Talos. But even less is known of the decades and centuries following the Civil War and the return of dragons in Skyrim. Most written records from 4th Era 202 until the late 5th Era are sparse, mostly destroyed in conflicts that ravaged the continent and because even though The Elder Scrolls 6 was announced back in 2018, we barely have any information about it, so I'm just gonna make up my own lore from here on out. What I'm going to assume from in-game lore is that after Alduin's defeat, the 5th era begins soon after, as Arngeir vaguely mentioned something about the turning of the age. The 5th era lasted about 600 years, this known as the First Dark Age. After the Second Great War between the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion, the whole of Tamriel lay in devastation. Once great cities were razed to the ground in a war that, by the time it ended, had no clear winner. Indeed, both sides of the conflict claimed victory, but due to the lack of records, the actual winner is impossible to determine. What is known is that for a time, the Empire retained control of its territories, but the worship of Talos remained illegal. Tamriel in that time remained in a relative state of stagnation, with occasional conflicts erupting between what was now known as the Northern Tamrielic Empire and the Dominion. The year 627 of the 5th era saw the birth of a young Nord, who instead of a father was said to be the blessing of Kynareth. By the time he was a grown man, around 5th era 655, the young man had a vision from Kain, who told him that he was the mortal representation of Talos, and that his job would be to restore the worship of Talos across Tamriel. Many Nords rallied around him and began preparing for the Great Rebellion, but mere months later Imperial authorities apprehended him in Whiterun, and he was executed soon after. However, the Nords secretly created a new pantheon with this prophet in the center, and by what is now considered 6th era 327, Emperor Constantine Vichy finally made it legal to once again worship Talos. This event triggered yet another war with the Dominion. The High Elves were determined to crush the Talos worship for once and for all, and even though they had failed to do so even over 6 centuries prior. The war once again led to total devastation, and this time both the Empire and the Dominion totally collapsed. Skyrim in this time ceased to be both a part of the Empire and even a unified province. In fact, all across Tamriel it was the local leaders who held the most power. Some say that the Third Great War between the Empire and the Dominion didn't so much as end, but led to what historians call the Great 4th Century Collapse. For the next 600 years, local jarls, counts and ruling houses fought petty feudal wars. Over time, kingdoms arose, among them the new kingdom of Morrowind, which soon became the dominating power in eastern Tamriel. In the west, the Bretons of High Rock formed the Empire of Brittany, which soon conquered Hammerfell and most of Skyrim, including the hold of Whiterun. It was under Breton rule that Whiterun regained its status as a major trade hub, as routes passed through here from all the major ports of Skyrim south to Cyrodiil and east to Morrowind. In 6th era 1200, Western Skyrim managed to become independent from the Bretons after 60 years of complicated feudal scheming. This independent kingdom of West Skyrim lasted until 6th era 1450, when it was conquered by Hammerfell. A century later, in Cyrodiil, or as it was now called Eratilia, after Gabagool was invented in 6th era 900, a local king decided to do some conquering of his own, and in 6th era 1550 gained control of Falkreath and Whiterun. But as Eradili kings were more concerned about plotting against the Pope in the imperial city, and the Bretons too busy oppressing farmers, West Skyrim fell to the Dunmer in 6th era 1721. The Dunmer at this point were going through a social revolution. By this point, the entirety of Morrowind had been under the firm rule of House Redoran, with Vanessa Redoran proclaiming herself Emperor of all Dunmer and Protector of Argonia in 6th era 1700. She rejected the old ways of the Dunmer, abandoning Azura for Talos and ordering the destruction of Vivec City, to rebuild akin to the cities in Eratilia and be named after herself as Saint Vanasahelm. These new architectural styles would be brought to Whiterun as well, crowned with the construction of the Grand Palace at the foothill of the Throat of the World. In the 1780s of the 6th era, a peasant revolution in Brittany, which established the First Breton Republic, threatened Whiterun once again, and new defensive structures were constructed around the city. As the Breton armies advanced, however, the local Jarl ordered all buildings outside the walls to be burned, as to deny cover for enemy troops. The Bretons failed to conquer Skyrim, and Dunmer rule would endure. However, Republican ideas stuck, and in 6th era 1830, Emperor Garethi abolished the system of serfdom that had existed in Tamriel since the 1300s. Furthermore, the Emperor introduced an administrative reform which essentially ended the relative independence the larger towns of Skyrim had enjoyed so far. Until then, the cities were controlled by a raft of local merchants affiliated with the Colovian League, with the Jarl, while still residing in the cities, being delegated a more ceremonial role. The so-called Colovian League was an influential medieval commercial and defensive confederation of merchant guilds and market towns in central and northern Tamriel. The League originated from various loose associations of Tamrielic traders and towns formed to advance mutual commercial interests such as protection against piracy and banditry. These arrangements gradually coalesced into the Colovian League, whose traders enjoyed duty-free treatment, protection, and diplomatic privileges in affiliated communities and their trade routes. Colovian cities developed a common legal system, governing their merchants and goods, and operated their own armies for mutual defense and aid. Reduced barriers to trade and the resulting prosperity gave way to economic interdependence. Kinship ties among merchant families and mutual trust, all of which gradually solidified the League into a cohesive political organization by the end of the 13th century. Over time, Colovian merchants essentially had a trade monopoly in Tamriel, and merchants in Whiterun enjoyed considerable wealth. Towns in the Colovian League either adopted Kvatch or Skingrad law, which were legal codes according to which these towns were governed. These were also known as town rights. Kvatch law provided for municipal self-government and self-administration, yet did not negate dependence upon a lord, be it a bishop, duke, or a king. Instead, it allowed the cities a certain degree of autonomy and self-reliance in legislative, judicial, and executive matters. While these authorities were vested in the city council, also known as a rat, consisting of 20 ratsherren. They were not elected by the citizens, but they would appoint a new member of their own from the city's merchant guilds. This was considered a key representation of the guilds in the Rat of the city. The period of office was in principle 2 years, but the Rat would ask a Ratsherr to stay in office, which usually happened, so the election was effectively for life. The Rat elected up to 4 townmasters from its members, who shared the power of government. The first townmaster, usually the eldest of them, acted as a primus inter pares. These rulers were in force up to the middle of the 19th century. This model of city government provided that only the most experienced, influential, and personally most successful merchants and a few lawyers called syndics became members of the Rat. It was also a rule that a father and his son or brothers could never be members of the Rat at the same time, so that influential families could not get too large of a share of the influence on the city's politics. Town rights were also important for the local peasants, who by the end of the 14th century had become serfs. By law, a serf was bound to land. This meant that you weren't allowed to move someplace else should you so wish. The local lord was your master, and essentially you came with the real estate. Sometimes serfs would run away to cities governed by some sort of law that I mentioned earlier, and if a serf manages to hide out in the city for a certain amount of time, in this case 1 year and 1 day, they fall under the protection of the city. A real-life example of this is from 1535, where a landowner named Johan von Uexküll was executed by the Rat of Tallinn, back then known as Reval, for killing a former serf who was under the town's protection. As a twist of irony, one of his descendants, Alexander from Uexküll, was the mayor of Tallinn from 1878 until 1883. The League itself collapsed even before the Dunmer took over Skyrim, but its influence remained. Semi-independent cities controlled by wealthy merchants posed a threat to the empire's internal security, and so the system needed to be changed. Jarls would regain nominal control of their holds, but every settlement would have an elected council who would elect a mayor. In reality, this new legislative body was composed of former members of the Rat. Around the same time, in the first half of 6th era's 19th century, discoveries made by Breton scientists and engineers, while reverse engineering lost Dwemer technology, made their way into the Empire of Morrowind. Soon the landscape of Whiterun would be changed dramatically, as new means of production spawned factories, railroads, and new settlements around the old town. Thus began the Tamrielic Industrial Revolution. Thanks for watching the video, and be sure to subscribe, like the video, share it if you like it, and catch the next video, because Khajiit has many more other stories to tell.